Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's unbelievable. 362 days, almost an entire year, since the Deputy Prime Minister announced the reinstatement of the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund here on the shores of Lake Simcoe. And we're still waiting. After years of conservative investment, the Liberals canceled the cleanup fund in 2017, putting Lake Simcoe at risk. Sadly, the Liberals pledged to bring back the cleanup fund. Seems to be just another broken promise from a government that just can't deliver. The cleanup is needed now, but it doesn't stop there, Mr. Speaker. More needs to be done on the environment. Canadians are also looking for meaningful action on plastic waste. For too long, our country's been sending away its garbage for other countries to deal with. All too often, it ends up being disposed of improperly and eventually winds back up in our water, including lakes such as this. It's time for action on Lake Simcoe and for all MPs to support my private member's bill, C-204, to ban the export of plastic waste.
I'm not quite sure about the backdrop being parliamentary, but we'll move on. Humber.
Monsieur le Président, here.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the press reported that less than 3% of the ventilators ordered by the government have been delivered. Many producers, local producers, are awaiting accreditation. Vexos, for example, obtained a contract for many respirators in May, but it's just now received its accreditation. Why is the government dragging its feet during a pandemic? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I must admit that our government is taking the pandemic very seriously. That is why we have worked day in and day out to purchase items that we need to fight the pandemic. With respect to the ventilators, I must thank all Canadians who have worked so hard to build the ventilators here in Canada, even in my riding.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Jour et nuit, Monsieur le Président.
Day and night, Mr. Speaker. But in May, the Prime Minister said that it was important to get ready for the second wave. In May, the Prime Minister announced that we would have thousands of ventilators by the fall. It's the fall now, Mr. Speaker. And we've only received 3% of what he's promised. Why does the Liberal government always fail to deliver the goods? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I apologize, but that is not true. The reality is that our government has purchased from abroad and here in Canada many ventilators. And now we have enough ventilators across the country for the second wave. At the same time, we continue to purchase ventilators, medication, testing materials to be prepared to help Canadians in our fight against this virus. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Percent of the ventilators they promised have been delivered. That's a failure, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Canadian Medical Association raised the alarm that healthcare workers were going to run short of gowns, masks, gloves, and other PPE. The author of the SARS Commission report said this government got it wrong in the first wave. We know the government's been late on rapid tests. We know they've been slow and late on ventilators. Mr. Speaker, is this government going to come once again short for our nurses, our doctors, our PSWs as they prepare to help us in the second wave?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our nurses, our doctors, our personal support workers are not just preparing to help us, they are helping us. They are fighting the second wave right now. And that is why I am so grateful to all the Canadians who have thrown themselves into the manufacture of ventilators, who have thrown themselves into procuring ventilators. And the reality is we can be confident going into the second wave that we have the ventilators we need. When it comes to other forms of PPE, the reality is we have been so busy purchasing it that additional warehouse space has had to be found to.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the government laid out an agenda that failed to mention energy workers even once. Last night, workers were informed that Come By Chance refinery in Newfoundland and Labrador could be closing permanently. 500 families in communities in eastern Newfoundland and Labrador whose livelihoods are hanging by a thread because this government doesn't value their jobs. Mr. Speaker, why is this government abandoning the families of Newfoundland and Labrador?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me just say that I take the jobs of energy workers across the country very personally and very seriously. And that is why just 2 weeks ago, our government provided $320 million directly to the government of Newfoundland and Labrador in order to support their work in supporting energy workers. That, Mr. Speaker, is not rhetoric. That is action to support the energy workers of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Come By Chance is just the latest in a long line of Liberal failures when it comes to energy workers. On Friday, we learned that 2,000 Suncor workers were going to lose their jobs. Mr. Speaker, in 1 week, almost 2,500 paychecks from Alberta to Newfoundland and Labrador could disappear in the energy sector. That's 2,500 workers who will have to look for work in a pandemic. That's 2,500 working families that are wondering how they're going to pay for groceries. Mr. Speaker, when is this government going to have a real plan for energy workers and their families?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Speaker, our government absolutely understands the importance of the energy sector in providing high-paying jobs across the country and in being truly an engine of our economy. But let me disabuse the members opposite of the notion that somehow our government doesn't care for Alberta and Albertans in this crisis. During this pandemic, over 1 million Albertans have received the CERB. Out of a population of 4.3 million, that is nearly 1/4 of Albertans. Over 102,000 Alberta businesses have received the CEBA. And the wage subsidy has supported 5.6.
L'Honourable Député de la Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 73% of Canadians say we want an increase in health transfers. 81% of Quebecers say the same. 100% of the members at the National Assembly want more money for health. 100% of provincial premiers are saying we want more money for health. But every $100 the government invests in the pandemic, only 15 cents goes to health. Of the $28 billion expected by the provinces, that's not even 2% for health from this government. Why is the government abandoning health in the midst of a pandemic?
Honourable Vice-Premier Ministre.
The Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will never abandon health, nor will we abandon Quebec or Quebecers. The reality is that, thanks to our measures, Quebec has received $3 billion. 2 million Quebecers have received the CERB. That's almost 1 out of every 4 people in the province. And in addition, 157,000 businesses accessed funding.
L'Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Well, that's the real question, Mr. Speaker. Why? Why are the Liberals going against Quebec, the provinces, and a vast public consensus calling for an increase in transfers for health? Why are the Liberals refusing to increase health transfers when we're facing the worst pandemic in a century? Why are they turning a deaf ear when the second wave is filling up our emergency rooms. Why?
President.
The Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree that the second wave is upon us and that our country must work together to fight the pandemic. That's why we have given the provinces $19 billion for the economic recovery, $2 billion, $500 million at the start of the pandemic, and of course each year, $40 billion for health. That is support, Mr. Speaker.
Burnaby Sud.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, during the pandemic, we know that many Canadians have faced serious challenges, as have businesses. At the same time, the ultra-rich, wealthy, have made record profits. It's not everyday Canadians that should be paying the price, but the rich people in this country. What will the government do to ensure that ultra-rich Canadians pay their share of the recovery? The Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we said in the throne speech, we are going to find ways for dealing with extreme inequalities when it comes to wealth, namely by limiting certain actions, and by focusing on tax evasion. We must all pay our fair share, especially during a crisis.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of profits, we've learned that private clinics are charging between $50 to $250 for private tests for COVID-19. This is the exact opposite of what our public healthcare system believes in, where everyone has access. We heard from a Toronto mother, Carolyn McIsaac, who waited 4 hours for a test, and she was asked whether private testing was a solution. She said, no, of course not. I quote, all people should have equal access to testing. So what will the Prime Minister say to Carolyn to make sure we have a public healthcare system that works for everyone, not those who can pay for it?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that is a great question, and through you, I would like to say to Carolyn, I agree with her wholeheartedly. One of the great strengths and prides of Canada is we have universal access to our healthcare system. Everyone is treated the same. And when it comes to testing, let me just say how delighted I am that today Canada has approved its first antigen test, the Abbott PanBio, and we have an advance purchase agreement for 20.5 million of these tests. That is in addition to the ID Now tests, which were announced last week, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Niagara Falls.
Mr. Speaker, many workers in the tourism industry, people who are servers, flight attendants, hotel cleaning staff, and more are worried about their jobs. When I talk to leaders in these industries, they say a widely made available rapid test could significantly reduce the mandatory quarantine period for travelers and help these workers keep their jobs while keeping our community safe. Countries around the world are already ahead of us in doing this. Why hasn't the Prime Minister done the same?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the member opposite that the more tools, including testing options that we have as a country, the more options we have for employers and for people and Canadians all across this country. That's why today's announcement about the Abbott PanBio COVID-19 antigen test is a good news for employers exactly like the one the member opposite is talking about. We look forward to ensuring that we continue to provide a variety of testing options to Canadians as they become available.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Only this minister would pat herself on the back for failure to deliver tests on the same day that Ontario has to send their samples to California for processing. It's disgusting, actually. This year, many people won't be able to travel because they won't be able to see their ailing family members because they can't afford to take the quarantine. That's a reality for many people across this country, yet rapid testing could be the solution. Why has the Prime Minister not provided this tool as a way to augment quarantine requirements?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think in this House we all have to rise above personal attacks and focus on what matters most, which is being there for Canadians during their incredible time of need. And that's why on this side of the House we remain focused on ensuring that provinces, territories, indeed Canadians have the tools that they need to fight this pandemic. As the member opposite knows, we've been approving rapid tests. In fact, for a very long time, the Gene Expert test we've got 70 of those deployed in rural and remote communities across the country, including Indigenous communities. We're going to continue to work hard on this side of the House and stay focused on what Canadians need. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
29th, the Minister of Transport confirmed he is aware that it is his responsibility to help Canada's airlines survive the pandemic. It is so essential for this country, he said, and we expect and need an airline industry in this country. Well, Mr. Speaker, that was over 5 months ago. Yet this minister and this government continue to ignore this essential industry, with rapid testing still not widely available. I have a very simple question. Has he brought a plan for the airline industry to the Prime Minister? And if so, will we hear about it soon in Parliament, and will Canadians hear about it?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for bringing up a very important point, and I would also like to remind her that in the throne speech we fully acknowledged the fact that we need to address some challenges that exist within the air sector, and that is exactly what we are doing at the moment.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
The reality is the tests that they're talking about today won't be in the hands of Canadians till the end of the year. They had months to do this, and they failed, Mr. Speaker. So right now, people who are traveling abroad and entering Canada, there are people who have exemptions. Wouldn't it be better if everybody just had access to rapid testing? When will the Prime Minister provide Canadians with the ability to rapid test and see their loved ones again, especially for people who can't afford to take 14 days of quarantine and need to see loved ones?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think the member opposite is forgetting the announcement that we made just a few days ago about another rapid test approach. And that is in addition to the other 2 rapid tests that we've approved over the last several months. Mr. Speaker, testing is one component of maintaining and containing COVID-19 in our communities. In fact, we've been working with provinces and territories on a suite of tools that they need, including the support for additional contact tracing, for isolation housing, and in fact, supports for Canadians that are travelling within the country. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Monsieur le Président, le Premier Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made another one of his vague promises in the throne speech. He said that the government would be providing support to industries that were the hardest hit, including the tourism industry. However, the Canadian airline industry continues to express to focus on the government's inaction to provide access to rapid tests. Will the Minister of Transport come up with a plan? Did he put forth a plan and did the Prime Minister ignore it? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague is trying to go through an open door. We clearly stated that we are in the process of working on a plan for the air sector that was hard hit. And we mentioned that, in fact, in the throne speech. We are working on that important file so that Canadians can continue to fly in our country's aircraft.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
14 days away from work, in one place that might not be safe, away from family, away from children with shared custody, away from people who depend on someone for care. 14 days just doesn't work for most Canadians. This is a sacrifice Canadians are making right now because the Prime Minister has failed to deliver rapid tests. They're not coming anytime soon. And this is making travel a sacrifice that most Canadians can't afford. Christmas is coming. Why doesn't the Prime Minister have a plan to let people see their loved ones by using rapid testing to keep our community safe?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the 14-day quarantine is an important tool to reduce transmissions to Canada, which I'm sure the member opposite agrees is an important part of maintaining and containing COVID-19 in all of our communities. We work closely with provinces and territories as we look at other countries and other jurisdictions that have tried a variety of approaches to reduce that 14-day quarantine. We will make sure that whatever we do to protect Canadians includes ensuring that they are safe from importations of COVID-19, and we will stop at nothing to ensure that we've turned over every stone. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, back in March, the Bloc Québécois was calling for assistance for fixed costs for companies. In April, the Bloc succeeded in getting the government to vote in favor of a motion on fixed costs. 6 months later, and we're still waiting. Since October 1st, we've been put back in lockdown. Over 12,000 small and medium-sized businesses are threatened. As of October 2nd, Quebec announced assistance for fixed costs, but we've seen radio silence from the federal government. It's been 6 months. When are they going to take some action? The Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for the excellent question. As the Bloc Québécois member knows full well, in the throne speech, we promised assistance for small and medium-sized businesses for fixed costs. It's necessary, and more so than ever before, because of the second wave of the pandemic. Our government agrees that this is an essential program. We are currently working with companies, with the provinces and territories to organize a program. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. It's been essential for 6 months, and there are some 12,000 companies that have had to close down because of COVID, because we're in the red zone. Fixed costs continue to rise, including rent, except that emergency assistance for commercial rent is a fiasco. Landlords are refusing to participate, and renters can't qualify because the criteria are too restrictive. Commercial rent assistance can't be used at this point. When will the government adapt it? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, I agree with the member of the Bloc that today it is necessary to adapt the program to help companies. We are currently working on that with the provinces, of course, including Quebec. Yesterday, in fact, I had a discussion with the Quebec Minister of Finance on this issue, and I'd like to point out that Canada will always stand up for Quebec. Almost 25% of Quebecers received the CERB.
Member for Regina Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, last week, the Alaska to Alberta Railway Development Corporation received the necessary American permit to move that project forward. This $17 billion private sector initiative is a true nation-building project that will connect the Yukon and Northwest Territories with the rest of Canada, all while creating 28,000 jobs. Can the government confirm that it supports this initiative to open up Canada's north?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we are firmly committed to ensuring that sustainable projects get built in this country and that they are assessed in a timely, fair and rigorous way. With respect to this specific project, we have not yet received an initial project description, but like with all projects, if and when we receive it, we will assess it.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, we know that this Prime Minister loves to kill projects in Western Canada. The Alaska to Alberta Railway Project is a $17 billion private sector initiative that will connect Western Canadian resources to international markets. But the Prime Minister has already hinted that he will use his old friend Bill C-69 to kill this project for the sake of the West, for the sake of the Yukon and Northwest Territories, for the sake of all Canadians. Will the Prime Minister put aside his own selfish ideology and say yes to this project?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how many other ways I can say it. We have not yet received an initial project description on this project. As soon as we do, we will certainly assess it in accordance with the processes that are in place.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, Suncor announced 2,000 more layoffs in the energy industry. This industry supplies the world with ethical energy, creates the wealth underpinning our social programs, and the workers have had enough. Enough of the rhetoric that has sent jobs and investors fleeing to other countries. Enough job-killing laws like C-69 and C-48. Enough of the project cancellations. When will this government admit that it is responsible for destroying thousands of jobs, dividing the country, and enriching foreign energy suppliers?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying that we're all thinking about the workers at Suncor who are facing uncertainty, worrying about their jobs and their future. Across the globe, oil and gas producers are coping with two crises, a global pandemic and the aftershocks of a global price war. Companies in Canada, in the U.S., around the world are reacting. They're shifting operations, but it's workers who are bearing the brunt of it. In the face of these shifts in the oil sector, our government is working with workers and their communities. We will support them. We will continue to support them. Workers are at the heart of everything that we do, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 2,000 jobs lost at Suncor is devastating, and equally devastating is the non-answers we continue to get on these matters. This is 5 years of indifference from this government towards an oil and gas sector that has been the heart and soul of this country for decades. We need this government, and our industry deserves this government, to actually commit to this. What we need is a regulatory system that works for Canadians. We need a taxation system that works for the industry, and we need a commitment to deliver our products to market. When and where is going to be the support that has been promised, not within hours or days or weeks, but now over 6 months ago?
The Honourable Minister. I'm afraid you're on mute, Minister of
There we are,
Natural
Mr.
Resources.
Speaker. Let me repeat that. As Suncor said, the sad news of layoffs are a direct result of, quote, the unprecedented drop in oil prices, the continued impact of the global pandemic and economic slowdown, as well as continued market volatility. This is painful news for workers here in Canada and around the world, but we hardly rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. We've taken unprecedented action to support oil and gas workers through the emergency wage subsidy, through our $1.7 billion orphan and inactive wells program, and through our supports to upgrade facilities on the offshore. We'll keep it up, Mr. Speaker, and we will keep supporting our oil and gas workers.
Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are experiencing the worst public health crisis in a century, one that will only end with an effective treatment or vaccine. Yet, without a public pharmacare system, they have no assurance.